You're watching a man climb down into a concrete box full of sewage at 20 minutes to 3 in the morning. Verdon Road, the far west edge of Pima County, Arizona. A dead industrial park, 11 metal buildings that never got tenants, one security light on a leaning pole. His name is Ray Tolliver. He is 43 years old, he owns one vacuum truck, and he charges $310 to empty a household septic tank. Right now, he is standing in 8 inches of effluent with a hacksaw in his hand, cutting the last of 12 capped PVC tubes out of a wire cradle that somebody bolted to the inside wall of that tank. Each one is 38 inches long. Each weighs 41 pounds. 11 are already in the front of his truck. The 12th is in his hands, and it holds $400,000 in hundreds, vacuum sealed into bricks, dry as a hymnal. Then 2 vehicles come down the service road with their headlights off. 40 feet of open gravel between Ray and his cab. One working light, and he had not broken it, because a broken light is a thing men notice. So he does the only thing left to a man who has spent 22 years around holes in the ground. He reaches up, takes the lid by its lifting lug, and pulls it over his own head. Car doors, 3 of them. Boots crossing gravel without hurry, the way a man walks through his own kitchen at night. One set goes down the length of the truck and stops at the pump, listening. The pump is running. The hose is in the riser. There is no version of this world in which that truck drove itself here. The boots come back. They stop on the lid. Directly above Ray's face, close enough that grit sifts through the seam and lands on his mouth, a man in reading glasses on a cord takes a marbled composition notebook out of his jacket and opens it. 4 inches of concrete. That is the whole distance. How does a one-truck septic contractor take $31 million off a cartel without ever pointing a gun at anybody, without a partner, without one day of being a person anybody looked for? How does the dirtiest job in the county turn out to be the best cover in it? It started with a sound, a change in the pitch of a pump, at 5:10 on a Tuesday morning, in a yard where the grass was dead in a shape too square to be an accident. To understand how Ray Tolliver ended up sealed inside a septic tank under the boots of a man who kills people over arithmetic, you first have to understand why he was the only man alive those people let near the bottom of one. Nobody looks in a tank. That is not a turn of phrase, and it is not a joke. It is the entire story. 14 months earlier, Tolliver Septic and Vacuum worked from a metal shop building on a half-acre of caliche in 3 Points, Arizona, 40 minutes west of Tucson. A gravel yard, a parts washer with a cracked lid, and a stray dog that had adopted Ray in 2021 and never gotten around to being named. And one truck. The truck was the business, a 1998 International, 2,500 gallons of steel on the frame, a Massport pump off the power takeoff, 100 feet of 3-inch hose on the rack. Working alone teaches a man to move the controls to wherever his hands already are. In 2014, Ray had run 1/4-inch aircraft cable from the pump's vacuum pressure lever along the frame rail to a steel ring near the hose end. It let him reverse the flow without climbing up on the deck. It cost $11, and for 10 years, all it did was save him steps. His father had dug tanks by hand in Pima County, and he had a line he used the way other men used prayer. Somebody's got to do the bottom of things. Here is what the bottom of things paid. 41 tanks a month at $310 apiece. 12,700 gross on a good month with no rain. Then diesel, tipping fees at the county septic station off Ina Road, $840 a month in insurance, and a note on a pump rebuild at 19%. He cleared about $3,100 a month and had since 2016. Odessa Fike took his calls, 61, working from her own kitchen in Robles Junction, dispatching septic trucks since 1989. She kept the book in pencil. Ray asked her once why she didn't use the tablet her nephew bought her. "Because people change their minds, honey," Odessa said, "and pencil forgives them." Ray's wife, Renata, had died 3 years earlier. Ovarian, found late, gone in 11 months. What she left behind, besides a laminated index card of her handwriting taped above the tachometer, was $61,400 in medical debt that a collection company in Nevada called about on Saturdays. And she left Nora. Nora Tolliver was 12. She counted things out loud without knowing she did it. Mile markers, ceiling tiles, the seconds between the shop compressor kicking on and off. She rode along on Saturdays with her feet on the dash and named the customers' dogs. She had a spine that was going wrong. Adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. Nobody's fault, no cause, no reason. Her thoracic curve had been 31 degrees at the start of 6th grade and 41 by spring, which is not a slow number, and the brace she wore 14 hours a day had stopped doing what a brace is supposed to do. Dr. Halim Barzani in Phoenix set it straight, a tall, unhurried man who kept a spine model on his desk and turned it toward the parent instead of away. "I won't dress it up for you," he said. "Above 50 degrees it stops being a back. It starts being a lung." He wanted a posterior spinal fusion, T4 to L3, 13 levels, inside the year. He was out of network. The quote, surgeon, anesthesia, implants, 7 days inpatient, came to $214,000. Ray sat in the parking garage afterward with the engine off and did the arithmetic he already knew the answer to. $3,100 a month, minus the mortgage, minus the collection company, minus what a 12-year-old costs. There was no month in that column with $214,000 at the bottom of it. There was no year either. He checked it 4 ways with a mechanical pencil on the back of a manifest before he let himself stop. He was not a criminal. He wants that on the record. And later he'd say it in those words to a federal agent chewing a cinnamon toothpick. He was a man doing arithmetic with no solution, in a truck that smelled like the inside of other people's lives. Then in October, Odessa called him with a job he almost turned down. "Fella name of Mesquer," she said. "Tavo Mesquer. Wants 5 tanks on a route, all out west. Says he'll do $600 a tank, cash, and he wants them done at night." $600 a tank was nearly double. $3,000 for one night's work. And the night part didn't bother him, because nights are where the good money in that trade has always been. "What are the properties?" Odessa read them off in pencil order. A shuttered Sonoran restaurant on Old Nogales Highway, with the sign still up. A rental house on Cielo Vista, empty 2 years. A stone yard on Sandario. A dead car wash. And a building on Verdon Road that Ray had driven past 100 times without ever seeing a vehicle in the lot. Empty places. Every one of them. Mesquer met him at the first stop himself, which Ray thought was odd for a property manager. Careful clothes, a nice truck he kept clean in a county where nobody keeps a truck clean. He counted the cash into Ray's hand in 50s. Exact. No receipt. He had 3 instructions, and he gave them like a man reading a list he had not written. Call the number before you come out. Never show up early. If the gate at Verdon is chained, don't cut it. Call. Insurance thing, Mesquer said, and smiled the way people smile when they've already decided what your face is going to do. Ray took the money. He drove to the second address with the radio off. At the shuttered restaurant on Old Nogales Highway, he found the lid without a probe, which almost never happens. He didn't have to hunt for it, didn't have to run the bar across the caliche listening for the change in sound. He found it because the grass around it was dead in a rectangle. Clean edges, 4 feet by 4, brown as a burn scar, in a yard where everything else had gone feral. Grass dies like that when something heavy sits on it. Over and over, for a long time. Ray stood in his own headlights with the probe in his hand and thought, somebody has had this lid off a lot. He pumped it, and it pumped like a tank. 900 gallons, ordinary, ugly, done in 20 minutes. He drove home at 3 in the morning with $3,000 in the console and decided he'd been imagining things. He saved Verdon Road for the following Tuesday. That was the morning everything changed. It changed at 5:10, and it did not announce itself. The industrial park was the loneliest place on his route, 11 buildings with roll-up doors and nothing behind them, weeds coming through the asphalt in seams, that leaning pole throwing a cone of sodium orange across the gravel. The tank sat behind Building 4. 1,500 gallons, 2 compartments, risers at both ends, a manifest sticker so faded he had to angle his light to read the year. Ray backed to within 9 feet and set the brake. He engaged the power takeoff and listened to the pump come up to speed, the way you listen to your own furnace. He walked the hose out, slid the lid off the outlet riser with the T-bar, and then he stopped, the way he stopped for 1 second at every tank and looked down into it. The smell came up first. If you have never stood over an open septic tank, the word you're reaching for is not strong enough. It isn't a bad smell. It's a physical event, a warm exhale off the ground that gets into the weave of your shirt and stays there through 2 washes. Ray hadn't properly smelled it in 9 years. That's the part nobody believes. You stop smelling it, and your body files it under weather. He fed the hose down until the stiff end kissed bottom, then pulled back 4 inches so he wouldn't scour concrete, and walked back to the truck and opened the valve. The pump took hold. There is a note a vacuum truck makes when it is moving liquid. Low, steady, almost bored. Ray leaned on the fender and watched the sight glass and thought about a mechanical pencil and a number he couldn't reach. Then the note changed. It climbed. It went thin and hard, the sound a shop vac makes when it swallows a sock, and it held that note for a second and a half. Then the hose bucked in the riser and something hit the intake with a sound he felt in his sternum. Clunk. He shut it down. He stood in the dark and ran the list every pumper runs. A cinder block, a landscape timber, a dead dog, which happens more than anybody wants to know. Ray had once pulled a bowling ball out of a tank in Marana. It had not made that sound. It had not been 38 inches long and rolling. He pulled the hose. He put his light down the riser. The level was low enough now to see bottom, and the bottom was not bottom. It was a rack. Somebody had bolted a galvanized cradle to the inside wall of that tank, the kind of shelving you'd find in a walk-in cooler. Hanging in it, side by side, snug as shells in a bandolier, were lengths of white PVC pipe. He counted them with the beam and got 12. He stood up. He looked at the road. Verdun at 5:15 in the morning is nothing. A black strip with a culvert under it and no headlights in either direction for 4 miles. He got down on his stomach in the wet caliche and put his arm in up to the shoulder. The first one came out harder than he expected. 6-inch Schedule 40 PVC, capped both ends, the caps cemented and wrapped in a collar of black tape. Heavy. He lifted it one-handed and had to switch to 2. There was a stripe of yellow spray paint around the middle. 1 stripe, like a jar of preserves with the year on the lid. Ray sat back on his heels with it across his knees, gloves dripping, and did not open it there. That detail tells you who he still was. He put the lid back and wound his hose, and drove 19 miles home with a length of pipe on the floorboard where his daughter's feet usually went, and did not touch it until the roll-up door was down. He cut the cap off with a hacksaw. It took 4 minutes. What came out slid into his hand in bricks. Flat, vacuum-sealed rectangles in heavy clear plastic, packed so tight the corners had gone square, and inside each one a strapped bundle of $100 bills. He laid them on the concrete in rows and counted 40, and cut one open just to be sure it wasn't paper under paper. It wasn't. The strap said 10,000, and the strap was telling the truth. $400,000 on the floor of a shop in 3 Points, beside a parts washer with a cracked lid. Ray sat down on an upturned bucket and did not move for a long time. The dog scratched at the door, and behind Building 4, 11 more were still hanging in that cradle. 70 miles east, a woman named Teodora Ruelas had been staring at the same property for 9 months. Everybody called her Teddy. 46, 15 years with the Drug Enforcement Administration. A cinnamon toothpick going at all times since she quit smoking in 2019. Above her desk, where other agents pin a family photo or a mugshot, she had a photograph of a building. A metal warehouse with a roll-up door, shot at long lens from the shoulder of Verdun Road. When new task force people asked about it, she gave them the sentence she had built a career on. People flip, she'd say. Properties don't. You never catch couriers, you catch ground. Cash has to sit somewhere between the moving, and the somewhere is real estate, and real estate cannot get on a bus to Culiacan. 9 months earlier, a wire intercept out of Phoenix threw off one address. Verdun Road. No name, no context. Teddy got a pole camera up on the utility line at the corner, in a gray box that looked exactly like 11 other gray boxes. Then she watched 11 empty buildings do nothing for 270 days. 4 vehicles total. 3 of them turned around in the lot. Then on a Tuesday in October at 4:58 in the morning, her camera lit up on infrared and recorded a septic truck backing in behind Building 4. She watched the clip 11 times. A man in a ball cap walks a hose out, works 22 minutes, stops, then lies down flat with his arm in a hole, which is not what a man does when a pump out is going normally. Then he carries something to the cab, holding it away from his body. Teddy paused the frame on the truck door, where a phone number was painted in a font somebody picked from a catalog in 2009. Then she wrote 3 words on a legal pad and underlined them twice. Who pumps it? Here is the part that surprises people. He put it back. Ray drove out at dawn with the money resealed in that pipe with hardware store cement and a can of yellow paint that was not quite the right yellow. He lay down in the same caliche and hung it back where it belonged. He was shaking so badly he dropped it the last 3 inches. It rang against the others like a wind chime made of bad ideas. Then he slept 4 hours and took his daughter to a follow-up in Phoenix, already on a credit card. Barzani put the new films up and stood in front of them longer than a doctor should. 47 degrees. 6 degrees in 11 weeks. Then he said the sentence that decided the next 14 months of everybody's life in this story. I want her on a table this spring, not next fall. The scheduler wrote, Nora Tolliver, in a box on the 14th of March, in pen, contingent, the way hospitals write things they can unwrite. The financial counselor needed $75,000 to hold the date, inside 60 days, and said it kindly, which somehow made it worse. In the elevator, Nora leaned her head against her father's arm. It's fine, she said. It's just a number. She meant the 47. Ray heard it about the 75,000. He drove her home. He made her a grilled cheese. He waited until she was asleep. Then he sat in the dark shop with the dog's chin on his boot and thought about a wire cradle bolted inside a concrete box on a road with no headlights on it. Nobody looks in a tank. 3 nights later, he called Mesker's number and said the Verdun unit was showing solids and ought to go on a shorter cycle. That is a sentence nobody on earth argues with. Then he went out there, and he did not touch the money. He counted it. 12 tubes, 400 grand apiece, $4.8 million in one tank, at one address, on a route of 5. And standing there with his light in the hole, he understood something that arrived whole and did not need working out. They had to have him. A tank that never gets pumped fills. A tank that fills backs up into a building or breaks the surface of a yard. And a yard that smells brings the county out with a clipboard. Those 5 properties needed a septic contractor the way a body needs a liver. So they found the most invisible one in the district, paid him double, and told him to come at night. They had hired the only man alive with a legitimate reason to put a hose on the bottom of their vault. Now here is exactly how it worked. I'll lay it out once because Ray only had to work it out once. Start with why a buried tank is the best hiding place in North America, which sounds like a joke until you sit with it. It is private property, underground, on land nobody visits. It is not on a utility map because after about 1985 in unincorporated county, nobody kept good ones. Radar reads a tank as a tank, a void full of liquid, which is what it is supposed to be. A dog cannot work it. Inspectors look at permits, not contents. And no warrant on earth puts an agent shoulder deep in a stranger's septic tank on a hunch. The cell's build was simple, and it was good. The second compartment of a two-compartment tank does almost nothing except polish effluent on its way to the leach field. Blank the outlet baffle, drop a cradle down the riser, bolt it to the wall, and you have a rack sitting under 3 feet of liquid. The cash goes into 6-inch PVC, capped, cemented, taped, with a lead ingot in the bottom so each tube hangs straight. Watertight, odor-proof, invisible to everything except a hose. Now Ray's half, which is the half nobody saw coming. His truck was built in 1998 for a company in Nogales called Vasquez Grease Service. Grease haulers run a divider, a baffle welded across the front of the barrel so the load doesn't slosh a truck off a mountain road. When Ray bought it at auction in 2011, the divider was still in there, sealed and useless. 240 gallons of dead space at the nose that he had never once had a reason to open. There was a hatch on top to reach it, 20 inches across, and he'd opened it twice in 10 years, both times chasing a leak. So the route was this: pull the tubes at the property, up the ladder, open the hatch, drop them into the dead space, dry, hard, empty, close it, then pump the tank the way he was paid to, septage into the main barrel behind the divider, drive to the county station at Ina Road, open the rear discharge while a 22-year-old named Junior Pelt watched the meter and stamped a manifest. That rear valve empties the main barrel. It has never once in the history of vacuum trucks emptied the nose. Nobody opens a septic truck. No officer in Arizona is going to climb a ladder on a sewage hauler and put his face over that hatch on a hunch. Ray knew it the way he knew his own arithmetic. Then the last piece, the one that made it a system instead of a theft. Efrain Bardales, and Ray did not know that name yet, did not count money. Ray worked that out from the tape and the paint and the ingots. A man who wants to count bills does not seal them into pipe. Sealing them into pipe means you have decided to count containers. 12 in, 12 out. Weight checks, tape intact, stripe present, next address. So Ray did not take tubes. He emptied them and put them back. Cut newsprint to the size of a brick. Wrap it in the same clear vacuum plastic, $11 a roll at any warehouse store. Bring the whole thing back to 41 pounds even, on a bathroom scale, with lead shot in a sock. Cement the cap, tape the collar, 1 stripe of yellow, and after the 3rd try he had the right yellow, a Rust-Oleum color called Sunburst. 2 hours apiece, on the shop floor, roll up door down, dog outside. The first night he did it, he took 2. $812,000, riding dry in the nose of the barrel under a full load of raw septage, west on 86 through the Border Patrol checkpoint at 3 points at 6:40 in the morning. An agent waved him into secondary out of pure boredom. A Belgian Malinois walked the entire length of that truck, sneezed twice, and would not come back for its handler. He met the man who counted the tubes 8 weeks later, on his knees, at a live hose, with a loaded truck. The shuttered restaurant on Old Nogales Highway, 1:15 in the morning. Ray had 2 in the nose and the hatch bolted down when headlights swung off the highway and came up the Caliche Drive. He did not run. That is the thing about him, and it is the only reason there is a story. A man who runs is a man with something in the truck. A man who keeps working is a man doing a job at 1 in the morning, because that is when the job is. So Ray kept his hands on the hose and looked up into the lights with the flat, tired, annoyed face of every tradesman who has ever been interrupted. 3 of them. A driver who stayed with the vehicle, and a wide kid in a windbreaker who walked out to the road and stood looking at nothing, which told Ray more than anything else did. That is not what a curious man does. That is what a lookout does. And a man of about 50 who came across the yard without hurry, in a pressed shirt, reading glasses on a cord. He did not look at Ray. He went to the open lid, crouched, and laid his palm flat on the concrete beside it, the way a mother checks a forehead. He looked into the tank for 11 or 12 seconds. Then he put the glasses on, took a marbled notebook from his pocket, and wrote something with a golf pencil. "You are the pump," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir." "Mesker send you?" "Called the number, same as always." The man nodded slowly, still writing. His voice never went above the level you'd use in a library, and that was worse than shouting, because a man who never raises his voice has learned he doesn't have to. "What is in the truck?" Ray's whole life balanced on a plastic clipboard for about a second and a half. 9,200 pounds of somebody's problem, he said, and thumped the barrel twice with the flat of his hand. The barrel answered with the dull slop of a load half full. "You want to see it?" There was a pause of exactly the length that decides things. "No," the man said. He wrote one more line. Then he asked Ray's name, and Ray gave it, because a man who lies about his name to somebody who can read a truck door has already lost. And it went down in pencil, too, under a column of numbers. Efrain Bardalis. Ray would not learn it for 4 more months. He drove home with his hands shaking so hard he had to pull off at the junction. He sat there until it stopped. 240 gallons of dead space, and a man who would not climb a ladder to look at it. Nobody opens a septic truck. It held all the way to the end. Teddy Ruelas ran the plate in 11 seconds and the business in 4 minutes, and got 1 truck, 1 owner-operator, no employees, 41 loads a month logged at Ena Road, and no criminal history of any kind. Then she pulled the septage manifests, because a manifest is a beautiful document. Source address, gallons hauled, gallons discharged, stamped by the county. She spread 14 months of them across a table and sorted by address. And she found a 1-truck outfit servicing 5 vacant commercial properties on a strict rotation at night at a rate 2 competitors confirmed was double market. "He's their logistics," she told her supervisor that afternoon. "Nobody stops a septic truck. Nobody searches one. It's a rolling safe with a hauler permit and a legitimate reason to be at every one of those addresses at 3 in the morning." She was 90% right, which in that trade is worse than being wrong. Her supervisor wanted him picked up, the truck on a lift, a cutting wheel, a press conference at the end of it. Teddy said no. "People flip, properties don't. If I take the truck, I get a driver and a hole in the ground with nothing in it. I want the ground with somebody standing on it." So she got her extension. And one Thursday morning, she stood 20 feet from Ray Tolliver in a county polo shirt while he opened his rear discharge, and she watched the load go into a receiving grate and smelled what he smelled, and then sat in her car with both hands on the wheel. For 9 weeks after that, the only person in Arizona who knew Ray Tolliver was robbing a cartel was a federal agent who was completely certain he worked for one. The money made him better at it. That is the part he could never explain afterward. He had needed $75,000. He had it by the 2nd week of November, in a cashier's check bought at a credit union in Casa Grande, where nobody knew his truck, and the scheduler in Phoenix put Nora Tolliver in ink. He should have stopped there. He knows it. He has said it. Instead, he started keeping a book. He worked out the rotation, which took 5 weeks of nothing but attention. Tubes came into Verdun heavy and left light. Cielo Vista filled after Verdun emptied. Sandario was the deep storage, where a tube could sit 5 months without moving. He learned it the way he'd learned which customers' dogs bite. And once he had it, he stopped being a man who found money and became a man who scheduled it. He began calling in pump-outs that weren't due. Sandario showing solids at the outlet. Cielo Vista soft over the leach field. Nobody argued, because nobody on that phone knew what a leach field was. He wrote his manifest light. That one mattered. Junior Pelt at the receiving station was 22, with a meter, a stamp, and the specific alertness of a young man in a boring job. And in December, he leaned in the truck window. "Hey, you're running about 240 under on these all winter." Ray had the answer ready before the kid finished, which frightened him more than the question. "Old barrel," he said. Divider up front holds water I can't dump, county knows. Junior nodded and stamped it. He would remember that conversation later, in a room with a video camera in the corner. And Odessa Fike, who had kept his book in pencil for 6 years, opened it one morning and found 4 entries in a hand that was not hers. She said nothing for 2 weeks. Then she said it the way a woman who has raised sons says things. "Ray, you're booking your own jobs now. Saves you a call." Odessa drank her instant coffee and looked at him over the rim of it. "You bought Nora a water heater and a used Tahoe in the same month." "I picked up work." The lie came out fast and smooth and finished, like a thing that had been waiting in a drawer. They both heard it land. That was January. In February, the cell came up short. Not because of Ray exactly, and not only because of him. Somebody 2 levels above Tavo Mesquer ran a reconciliation against a manifest out of Chicago. And when they weighed what the plaza believed was in the ground against what had been physically counted by anybody at any point in 14 months, the answer was that nobody had counted anything. That is the thing about counting containers. It is fast, it is clean, it works for years. And the day somebody finally opens one, the whole system falls in at once. The plaza ordered a recount, a full physical inventory, every property, every tube, caps off, bills on a table. Tavo Mesquer stopped answering his phone on the 9th of February. Ray noticed because the number went to a recording. Then a week later it rang, and a different voice answered and said, "Yes," and nothing else. His 5 appointments became 4. Nobody explained why, and Ray did not ask, because by then he had a pit under his shop floor with a great deal of money in it, and men who have that do not ask questions that lead back to their own mouths. Then Odessa called him on a Tuesday with a job at an address that had never been on the route. 190 Cielo Vista, 4 in the morning, same number, same rate, one new instruction: bring extra hose. Ray got there at 10 of 4 and knew before the lid was off, because what came up out of that riser sat on his chest like a hand. He pumped for 6 minutes. The pitch changed. The hose bucked. He shut it down, put his light down the hole, looked at what was floating in 11 inches of liquid, and then walked out to the middle of that empty street and was sick in the gravel. Tavo Mesquer had counted cash into his hand in 50s. Exact. No receipt. Ray finished the job. He wants people to understand why. If he'd left that yard with a truck half full, the men who put Mesquer down there would have known inside a day that their pumper had looked in the hole and run. And Nora Tolliver was asleep 19 miles away in a house with a screen door. So he finished. He wrote a manifest. He drove to Ina Road at 6:15 and discharged into a county grate, while Junior Pelt stamped his paperwork and complained about the Wildcats. At 7, Bardalis was sitting on an upturned bucket inside Ray's shop, with the roll-up door open behind him and the notebook on his knee. The dog was lying next to him, which Ray had never once seen that dog do with a stranger. "You did good work this morning." "Yes, sir." "New arrangement." He turned a page. He did not look up. "Nothing gets pumped unless I am standing there. Not a lid comes off in this county unless I am standing there. You call me directly." He wrote a number, tore the corner off the page, and held it out. "There is a man coming from home on the 4th of March. He will open every container in this district and count what is inside it. 19 days. He capped the golf pencil. "After that, everything is easy again." Then he stood and looked around that shop the way a man looks at a room he is measuring. "Your girl," he said. "Nora, she rides with you Saturdays." He said it pleasantly. He said it like a compliment. Then he got in his truck, drove off that lot at 15 miles an hour, signaled at an empty road, and turned. That night, Ray moved the parts washer, lifted the steel plate, and counted what was under his own floor. $31 million, give or take 11,000. 78 tubes worth, cut free of the pipe, stacked in bricks in a pit 4 feet deep and lined with pond liner. A bag of desiccant in each corner because concrete sweats. and every dollar of it was as useless to him as a photograph of water. He had spent, in 5 months, $194,075 for the deposit, the balance to the hospital in 3 cashier's checks, bought at 3 institutions, in amounts that don't generate a report, a water heater, a used Tahoe with a back seat that reclined. That was all of it. Everything else sat in a hole under a parts washer, and it would sit there until he was dead. Because the moment a man with a septic truck buys anything at all, he becomes a man somebody looks at. He'd gotten the number he needed in November. He kept going for 4 more months. Nora came out to the shop that night in her brace and her socks and stood in the doorway. "Dad, it's 2. I know it." "You're counting something," she said, because she counted things, because she always knew when somebody else was doing it. "What are you counting?" "Nights," Ray said. "Now, if this were a movie, this is where it would end, and it would end well. He has the surgery money and then some. The date is the 14th of March, in ink. His daughter goes to Phoenix and comes home taller and breathing right. Ray Tolliver never opens another lid on Verdun Road, and the cartel finds its containers light and blames a dead man named Mesquer, who is already blamed for everything else. Roll credits. A man who never hurt anybody wins one for a change. That is not what happened. The reason is a plastic box the size of a matchbook. On the last Tuesday in February, on his own floor, cutting open number 6 of what he had promised himself was the final load, Ray tipped out the lead ingot and found something taped to the bottom of it with electrical tape. A satellite asset tracker. The $19 kind shipping companies zip tie into freight containers with a 5-year battery and a magnet in the base. He sat with it in his palm on the bucket. He knew what it did because anybody who owns a truck knows what a tracker is. It sleeps underground. Concrete and 3 feet of liquid kill the sky. And the second it gets out from under all that and sees open air, it wakes up, finds satellites, and tells somebody where it is. He had opened that hatch under the sky on the 16th of February, 6 days. Somebody with a phone had been watching a blue dot sit in a gravel yard in 3 Points, Arizona, for 144 hours, like a pin somebody had already pushed into a map, and had not come, which meant they were not coming to take it back. They were waiting for the 4th of March. A counter from home would open every container in the district. Then they would come to a yard they already had the address of and do arithmetic on a man in front of his daughter. Ray did not sleep for 2 days. On the 3rd day, a woman with a cinnamon toothpick was leaning on his front bumper at the Ena Road station at 6:20 in the morning. "Mr. Tolliver, Teddy Ruelas, DEA." She showed him credentials and put them away without watching whether he read them. "You service 5 vacant properties out west at night, for cash. I've had a camera on one of them for 11 months. I'm not arresting you. I'm telling you where I am." Ray stood there in his boots with the hose still dripping. "I've known since October, and I've got a warrant package on a judge's desk right now for all 5 parcels. You know what the problem with it is?" "No, ma'am." "Ground." She rolled the toothpick to the other side of her mouth. "I can dig up every one of those yards and I get dirt and a lawyer. What I need is a principal. A man with a name, standing on that ground with the product in his hands. Without that, I've got a very expensive hole." She handed him a card. "You're the only person who touches all 5, she said. "That makes you worth something. It also makes you the last man alive who touches all 5, if you follow me. Think about which one you'd rather be." "I pumped tanks," he said, and got in his truck and drove away. He made it 4 miles before he had to pull over because he had just been handed the last piece and his hands would not hold the wheel. He knew what the cartel needed: a count on the ground on a specific night. He knew what the federal government needed: a named man on that same ground with the money in his hands. And he was the only man in Arizona who could put those 2 things in the same yard on the same night because he decided when the lids came off. On the 28th of February, the clock jumped, the way clocks in this story do. Bardalas called at 9:40 at night and did not say hello. The man came early, Thursday. All 5 properties, one night, starting with Verdine. You will be there at 4 with the truck, and you will open every lid I point at. Thursday was the 2nd of March. Nora's pre-op was on the 13th. Ray hung up and stood in his kitchen with the refrigerator humming. Then he called the number on the card and said 9 words to a voicemail. Verdin Road, Thursday. Don't come before 6 in the morning. He never said his name. She knew his voice. The warrant was signed at 4:15 Wednesday afternoon. Execution was set for 6 a.m. Thursday, which is when federal warrants get served in Arizona, because the light is good. Wednesday night, Ray called Odessa Fike and told her not to answer the shop line the next day, no matter who called, and to go stay with her sister. Ray, she said, what did you do? Books and pencil, Odessa, he said. It forgives people. Then he worked through the night on his own shop floor, cutting newspaper into bricks and running lead shot onto a bathroom scale until he had 12 tubes cemented, taped, weighted to 41 pounds even, and striped in sunburst yellow. Into the 9th one, before he set the cap, he taped a $19 satellite tracker with a magnet in the base. Verdin was first on the count, and Verdin was where the tracker had to be, which meant he had until 4 in the morning to empty a cradle he had spent 14 months learning how not to touch all at once. Nobody looks in a tank. He had built 14 months on that sentence. He was about to find out what happened when somebody finally did. Thursday, 1:50 in the morning, Verdin Road. Ray backed the International to within 9 feet of the outlet riser and left the engine running with the power takeoff engaged, because a pump already turning is a pump that does not have to be started. He had done one thing that evening that made no sense for a man in his trade. He'd pumped a tank in Avra Valley at 6 and then not gone to Ena Road. He came to that industrial park with 2,300 gallons of somebody else's Wednesday still in the barrel. A full truck is a truck that cannot work, and every pumper knows it. He walked the hose out, dropped it down the riser, and slid the lid back, and then went down the ladder into 8 inches of liquid with a hacksaw in his belt and a headlamp with a red filter on it. Then he started the laps. Cut the tie wire, lift the tube free, up the ladder, open the hatch, drop it into the dead space at the nose. Down again with a decoy over his shoulder, newsprint, lead shot, 41 pounds, sunburst yellow, and hang it where the real one had been. 6 minutes a lap. He did it 11 times. The 9th decoy had the tracker taped under its ingot. When he hung that one, he stood in the dark and felt it start looking for the sky through 3 feet of nothing. At 22 minutes to 3, he was on the 12th. And the 12th was the one he was not going to take, because Teddy Ruelas had told him exactly what she needed, and he had decided to give it to her. That is when they came down the service road with their headlights off. 2 vehicles. He heard them before he saw anything. Tires on caliche, that dry, tearing sound, and he had time to make exactly one decision, which was that 40 feet of open gravel under a working light is farther than any man has ever run. He hung the 12th tube, 400 grand of real money, back in the cradle where it started. Then he reached up, took the lid by its lug, and pulled it over his head. Now you know what the cold open didn't tell you. Car doors, 3 men, boots on gravel. Ray stood in the dark with his back to the wall, a foot from a rack holding 11 tubes of shredded newspaper, and listened to his own life get inspected. They went to the truck first, of course. A running truck at a dead property at 3 in the morning is the only thing in that yard with a story to tell. He heard the cab door open and close. He heard somebody walk the length of the frame rail. And then he heard the worst sound of the whole 14 months, which was a man's boots going up the ladder rungs on the side of his own barrel. 6 rungs, a pause at the top. Ray had 11 tubes and $4.4 million lying dry behind a 20-inch hatch with a hand on the ring of it. The man came back down. Nobody opens a septic truck. He had bet a year and a daughter on that sentence. Up on that catwalk, in the dark, with his hand on the ring, Some kid in a windbreaker made the same calculation everybody makes and let go and climbed down. Then Bardalis came across the gravel. Ray tracked him by sound. To the inlet lid first, the one with the manifest sticker. The one a man goes to because it looks official. The scrape of concrete. A long silence while somebody put a light down a hole and saw brown liquid, which is what a septic tank contains. The lid went back on. Boots again, unhurried, coming around. They stopped directly over Ray's face, close enough that grit came through the seam and landed on his mouth. He heard the notebook come out and open. And then he heard a phone. He heard a man in reading glasses, standing on 4 inches of concrete, look at a blue dot on a screen that said the money was directly beneath his boots. Aquí, Bardalis said, in that library voice. Trae la barra y la luz. 2 sets of footsteps went back toward the vehicles. That was the window. It was about 20 seconds long. Ray Tolliver got both hands on the end of a 3-inch suction hose and jammed the nozzle up into the seam at the edge of the lid, angled out and flat, the way you'd aim a garden hose under a fence. Then he found the steel ring on the hose collar and the 1/4-inch cable running from it down the hose, along the frame rail, to the pump's vacuum pressure lever. The cable he had rigged in 2014 so a man working alone wouldn't have to climb up on the deck to reverse the flow. He set his boots against the wall. He pulled it. The pump changed note, and the whole load came out of that hose at 70 pounds of pressure. The lid went off him like a bottle cap. What came out of the riser behind it was a column 11 feet high. Then the hose whipped, and the column became a wall, and the wall crossed the gravel at boot height and took Bardalis off his feet and into the side of his own vehicle. Then it was noise and dark and the smell, which arrived like a wall of its own. Ray went over the edge of the tank on his stomach. Somebody started shooting. There is nothing to say about it except that it was blind. Men who cannot see and cannot breathe, firing at sound, in a yard where the only sound was 100 feet of loose hose beating itself against a truck. 3 rounds went into the barrel, and it began emptying across the lot in a fan. A 4th went through the windshield. The 5th and 6th were fired by the kid in the windbreaker at something moving on his left, and the something moving on his left was the driver. Ray crawled under his own truck, between the duals, and rolled down the embankment into the culvert that runs under Verdon Road. 60 feet of corrugated pipe, dry as a bone in March. He lay on his side with his face in the crook of his arm and did not move. Above him and behind him, men shouted at each other in 2 languages, and one of them screamed for a long time. 70 yards north, on a utility pole at the corner, a gray box that looked exactly like 11 other gray boxes recorded 91 seconds of it in infrared and sent it to a server in Tucson. At 3:04, the shouting stopped, and 1 vehicle left, fast, north. At 3:20, Ray Tolliver came out of the culvert, covered to the collar, walked back across a lot 6 inches deep in the worst thing in Pima County, got into a truck with no windshield, and drove west on 86 with the heater on. The other vehicle was still in the yard. So was its owner, on his knees beside it, with corneas he was never going to get all the way back, and a marbled composition notebook coming apart in his hands like a wet paperback. At 6:02 a.m., a stack of federal vehicles turned off the highway onto the service road at Verdon, and the first thing every one of those agents did when they opened their doors was gag. What Teddy Ruelas found was 1 man with a gunshot wound to the hip, 1 man dead, 1 man blind and sitting upright in the gravel, refusing to answer to any name at all, and a 2-compartment tank standing open with a cradle bolted to the inside wall. In the cradle were 12 capped lengths of 6-inch PVC with yellow stripes around the middle. They cut them open on a tarp, one at a time, with a battery saw, while the sun came up over the service road. 11 were full of shredded newspaper. The 12th held $400,000 in hundreds, vacuum sealed, dry as the day it was packed. Nobody ever asked why 11 of them were newspaper. They assumed the cell had been robbed by the cell. That is what a plaza always assumes, because it is usually right, and because a dead property manager named Tavo Mesker was already sitting in a file. $31 million went into a ledger in Culiacan as a loss against a man who had been in the ground since February. Efrain Bardales pled to conspiracy and 2 counts of murder and is serving life without parole. He sees from one eye. Guards say he keeps a notebook. The counter from Sinaloa turned around at Hermosillo and never landed. Teddy Ruelas got warrants on all 5 parcels, 3 convictions, and a promotion. She still keeps a photograph of a building above her desk. Junior Pelt told 2 agents about a divider at the front of an old barrel. Nobody wrote it down. Odessa Fike still books septic work from her kitchen in Robles Junction, in pencil. Ray Tolliver was interviewed once, as a witness. He was never charged. Teddy Ruelas signed the report herself. Nora Tolliver went on a table in Phoenix on the 14th of March. 13 levels of titanium, 6.5 hours. She came out 2 inches taller and has never worn the brace again. The tank behind Building 4 is still in the ground, pumped on a quarterly schedule now, in daylight, by a licensed contractor out of Marana. The old barrel came off Ray Tolliver's truck in 2024 and sits on blocks in the weeds behind his shop, with a hatch on top of it and a dog asleep in its shade. Nobody has ever opened the front